The Great Dream, The Dream of Promised Joy by Rance DeWitt. America, Australia, Argentina, and South America. My grandfather drove this wagon to his silver mine in Apple Valley, California, when he left Ohio during the Great Depression. He had a newspaper in San Bernardino, and he also had a major production of bootleg whiskey during the Depression. One of his stepchildren was a poor Irish boy by the name of Gardner McCoy, who left the U.S. when my dad began school at Ohio State, staying with his grandparents. Gardner founded Bliss Welded Products in Wollongong, New South Wales, and minted the Australian coins for years. He was the first Rockefeller from America in Australia. I made 4 trips throughout Australia, over 40 years visiting my extended family there, with an invite to work for CSR, Colonial Sugar Refinery, from the old Dutch East Indies, and meeting with the director of his company in Sydney. But this book is not about those episodes in history, although related in a very real sense. This book is about Texas, Mexico, Central and South America, and most importantly, spending an afternoon with Pope John Paul in New Zealand. It all began in Dallas in 1963 as 2 middle schoolers ran ahead of the Kennedy motorcade down Commerce Street because the streets were so crowded, and went up the steps of the old historic courthouse across from the book depository building to the first floor empty courtroom and into the office of the judge to ask, "Can we sit in the big sandstone window to watch the president drive underneath?" The next event in this timeline was graduating from high school in 1967 and going to London to buy an old Triumph Bonneville to tour Europe and sit front row in the little Piccadilly Theater to watch Ingrid Bergman stage play in the show Waters of the Moon. Then meet Consuelo Vicente Vidal from Mexico and become engaged to fly back together to be married. But after a year of attending college in Mexico, under the influence of Carlos Castaneda and the shamans of Tolteca and other events, the marriage was postponed. Next was 1979, when Ronald Reagan, Dale Evans, Roy Rogers, and Conrad the Battery Guy landed one day in the yard of Moody Coliseum at SMU campus and gave a stage play chat to the students on the value of being an American. Then, in 1981, being stranded on a Vespa scooter in Pristina, Bosnia, when the Serbian Soviets were pulling their assassination attempt on the Pope, with the site now known as Medjugorje. 5 years later, graduating in geology and returning to Australia and the University of Sydney for a master's in anthropology in 1986. A turn of events would happen and the track forward to South America, Brazil, with a flight to Argentina with a stopover in Christchurch via Auckland, where an afternoon would be spent with Pope John Paul II in Christchurch. On the same day, November 23rd, 23 years later, after 1963, life was becoming very serendipity. The Great Dream of Promised Joy was actually written while in the similitude of a dream in Dallas, after having lost the true and only true love of his life, the wife from Mexico, that was given to him by God, although unknowingly at the time being a teenager. The book records a recovery of sorts from the darkness of loss to the light of discovery that actually happened to a few others like Franklin Graham in 1970, called The Born Again Experience. How St. John Paul can save America is told from how he and our American saint, Ronald Reagan, saved Russia and America from each other. Now, the new fulcrum for salvation balances on this message from Medjugorje. So learn how our 2 saints can save America from the predications of Revelations and the state of the world as it is now forming with the final Islamic overthrow of Europe. Most importantly is why America has a separate destiny and reality away from the old world to the new world with Christ. the author. The author became a born-again Christian in 1970, co-sharing with Franklin Graham at that same time when the born-again revelation experience was present in America. He was raised in the Greek Orthodox Church, yet attending all the denominational churches in Dallas, then moved into the Pacific Northwest at age 30, and later was baptized by the bishop after studying 2 years with the Mormons. Then, on one of many world travels, was invited by Senator Byrd's secretary to join her with a visit with Pope John Paul at a little church outside Christchurch, New Zealand in 1986, where they sat for an hour at the Pope's feet in the yard with a few other persons and witnessed another version of the Fatima event. As a storm from nowhere baptized he, the Pope, and the Bishop with a gusher from the sky. Years later, he would also be baptized by the Archbishop of Ecuador, who oddly was with the Pope a few months after the Christchurch Fatima event. How can he do it? St. John Paul can save America with a spiritual communication that resonates from him following the meeting in Christchurch, New Zealand as a witness in 1986, and with 20 years of reflection, travel, and study that was guided by the Pope. His most important prophecy the Pope gave is that Medjugorje can save America and Russia again from the coming worldwide chaos. So now we begin the story with Guadalupe, Fatima, Akita, and lastly, but not least, Medjugorje. So why America can be saved? Why America has a separate reality from the old world was learned from half a century of listening to sermons from every room denomination in God's house, but also from many travels throughout the old world, plus 4 other world travels throughout the South Pacific and Latin America. Not to mention trucking and busing through nearly every country and state from Alaska and Canada to Mexico and Central America and South America to Argentina. This learning curve uses the insight from John Paul and other astute Catholic writers and saints to question the source. The source? The source that is of the revelations given to Mohammed in a cave at Mecca, and the source of revelations given to a man named John in the Patmos cave, not by Jesus, as with Paul, but from a person named Gabriel. The question now is why neither of these 2 messages from this spirit person called Gabriel applies to America, making the destiny of America separate in the only land and peoples who now can accept the born-again Christ. That is what the return of Christ means. The nature of our quest to this subject is historical and religious, but also scientific and esoteric, because the author, while a regular Protestant, was trained in the Orthodox, Mormon, and Catholic traditions, and also as a Knight of Columbus and a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Mason, with a mechanics degree from junior college, a bachelor's degree in geology at regular college, and other certificates in teaching English as a second language, and working in property management for his broker's associate license, all the while working and traveling in several foreign countries to learn fish farming after being in the Merchant Marines in the Gulf of Mexico and studying at the Texas A&M Sea Grant College. How and why? How and why America, North and South, does not have to be in the worst part of this final judgment, now coming from every corner as prophecy told. This insight is not Bible talk. No, from Protestantism. It is told from history, science, religion, and most important, esoterics. The esoteric base is more than Masonry and the Knights. It also means discerning the wisdom of the saints, and most particularly St. John Paul, as well as being raised in Mary Baker Eddy's Christian Science environment, that included ARE, Edgar Cayce's Association for Research and Enlightenment, an excellent group of fortune tellers, and then studying after high school at the Marine Military Academy at a university in Mexico when and where Don Juan and Carlos Castaneda were out in the hills about somewhere in our region of Tolteca. So imagine Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, waking up in the presence of St. Augustine, Cardinal Ratzinger, Malachi Martin, Ronald Reagan, and Meister Eckhart, and St. John Paul, and then asking them to speak to him of these end times and what can be done to save the remnant Christians in the new world. As Jesus said, the first will be last.